I'm so thrilled that I found out that Jean had written a novel and actually sought her out and said, we really want to have you in the living room at Story and Song to talk about the story in the book. And we're delighted that Sue Weiner, who's read the book and loved the book, is in conversation today. So please welcome Jean and Sue to the Story and Song stage.
Thank you, Donna. And thank you for providing this wonderful gathering space for all of us. And I'm so glad to see you all here this afternoon to join in celebrating the debut publication of Jean's novel, A Glass Darkly. And I met Jean through our shared love of yoga. Now, the kind of yoga she and I do here is slow, gentle yoga, no pretzel postures, no advanced inversions. So when I read the book, I was delighted to see on the back page a picture of Jean doing one of the best headstands I've ever seen, out of doors. And it turns out that Jean does lots of stuff out of doors, including hiking. She has hiked the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. She's hiked extensively in the UK and Spain. And I have trouble with microphones. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Everything's okay?
You're good.
Okay. She turned her adventures on 2 of those hikes into her first published nonfiction books, Hiking England Coast to Coast, and Tracking the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. Can you tell I don't speak Spanish? And I practiced that. Okay. Jean grew up in the UK and graduated from Durham University with an English degree. She currently splits her time between here and Colorado. And you can read all about it in her blog, Salt Spray and Aspirin. I said aspirins? Aspins. Oh, this is going to be a good conversation. Okay, before we get started, Jean, is there anything you would like our guests to know?
Well, I do have a few people that I need to thank, particularly Story and Song. When we first moved here about 6 years ago, we discovered this place and loved it. And I never thought I'd be part of the programming. I also want to thank Emily Carmaine. I'm not sure if she's here or not. She was my first editor for A Glass Darkly. She was recommended by Story and Song. And we spent many hours deciding whether or not Brad would wear underpants or boxer shorts. Then I want to thank Lynette Janimi, who is my assistant for all of my writing, my blog. She is wonderful at promotions and publicity. I couldn't do without her. And of course, Sue. At the end of every yoga class, Sue says, "It's my honor to practice with you." Well, it is my honor to be in conversation with you.
Oh, now.
And also my partner, Chris Porth, who has traveled this journey with me. And there were certainly times when I thought I was going to give up on my dream of writing a novel, but he wouldn't let me.
Okay, to let you know what you're in for this afternoon, we're going to start by chatting about Jean's writing process. Then you'll get a chance to hear a little bit from the book, and then we'll delve more deeply into the book and end with another little reading, and then you'll get to ask the questions. So, Jean, tell me, how did you come to write this book?
Well, it started years ago when I was a little girl, and I was an early reader, And after I had read my first chapter book, which was called The Magic Chestnut, to my grandmother's horror, I wrote on the flyleaf my very first good book. And from then on, I knew that I was going to write something someday. But naively, I just assumed that the ideas would flood in, that I would have a plot, characters, it would all just come to me. Well, I turned 50, and the ideas had not flooded in. And as you heard, together with Chris, I had walked the coast-to-coast way across the United Kingdom. And so I wrote a short book about our adventures on the coast-to-coast. But it still wasn't a novel. And then a few years later, we took on an even greater challenge. We did the pilgrimage to, we'll see if I can say this, Santiago de Compostela. At the end of that pilgrimage, you end up in the cathedral and you see this dramatic censer swing down the aisles of the church. And it's really very moving. So after that adventure, I wrote the book that is now called Trekking the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. And that combined our journey together with the journeys of medieval pilgrims. It was an improvement on the coast to coast, but it still wasn't a novel.
So what finally prompted you to write A Glass Darkly?
Well, you will recall, I'm afraid, the year 2020, when there was COVID and we were all either locked down or carefully avoiding crowds. And I strayed across a website that gave writing prompts for short stories. I don't entirely remember the prompt, but it was something like, write about what happens when everything suddenly changes. And actually an idea flooded into me, and I wrote a short story that became the central wedding scene in A Glass Darkly. I didn't do anything much about it, and came back from Colorado to Florida, and then the month of November rolled around. And I remembered that Chris's son, a few years ago, had done a challenge called NaNoWriMo. This is a challenge where you write 50,000 words towards a novel during the month of November. So I took the challenge.
And how did that go for you? Was it fun?
Well, I completed the challenge within hours to go. But I have to say it was not fun. I had to adopt a very different style of writing. I'm usually very concise and very precise, and I choose the best word possible. And for this, I just had to throw the words onto the page. And by the time I was done, my back ached and my eyes ached. And it was no fun, but I did have the bare bones of a novel.
So at the end of November, you pretty much had the plot worked out? And did you know how your novel was going to end?
I can't say that I really did have the plot worked out. I had unraveled the stories of the main characters. Little interlude. So I knew what the main characters were going to do. I certainly didn't have the final chapter, but I did have the central theme, because it occurred to me that when everything changes, people change too, and they begin to question, who am I without all of the supports that I thought I had? And that led me to think even more widely about issues of identity. So many of us think that we are responsible for our identity. It's about the choices that we have made, particularly in difficult circumstances, but it's much more than that. Many of you will know that who we are is often determined by our zip code, what our access to education is like, and I began to think even more widely than that, in that I had some experience with people with developmental delays, and one person in particular had Williams syndrome, and that's a genetic disorder, but it determines some of your character, so that people who have Williams are very outgoing, they're very bubbly, and they also like music. So, you know, what is our identity about when some of it is shaped by maybe a genetic disorder? Who are we if we don't know what our family history is? Who are we if we do things that we cannot control? So I had many issues of identity to explore. And that's probably a longer answer than you expected.
Okay, you have your central theme and the plot. How did you finish the book?
Very, very slowly. 50,000 words does not make a novel, so I hadn't written all of it. So I had to finish the novel. Then I read it, and I cringed. It was awful. It was really awful. I had just unwound my story, but there was no quality to the writing whatsoever. And at this stage, I did start sending chunks of it to my first editor, who was very polite. And she took out all of the bits where I sounded more British than American. And we worked on it and reviewed it and reviewed it and edited it. And this carried on for maybe 2 years.
Okay, so now you have your final draft. Your editor has worked her magic. How did you get the book out to the waiting, reading public?
Very slowly. I first of all tried to get a traditional publisher, and many of you know that publishing has changed over the years, and it's quite difficult to do that, even though I have a couple of friends who recently have succeeded. And I came close. I talked with an agent at the Florida Writers Association conference who was very interested, and she said it was a good submission, a higher level than she usually received, that the story moved on quickly and engaged people, but she wasn't sure she could sell it. So then I moved to hybrid publishing, which is where the author contributes towards the production and marketing of the book. And I found a publisher who was very unreliable, and I had to walk away. So, a tip to anybody here, just Google who not to publish with. And then I found a publisher fairly local to here, and they read the first couple of chapters and said, yes, we want to go ahead. This is very interesting. And then they read further into the book. And this is a publisher that does not do intimate scenes whatsoever. And I looked at them and I thought, I just can't not include these because they're important for revealing character and moving my story on. So finally, Lynette, my wonderful assistant, recommended Transcendent Publishing, and I work very well with them. And the big advantage with them is that they promise, if you follow their guidelines, that you will be listed on one of Amazon's bestseller lists. And I actually made it to 2 bestseller lists. So I would recommend them.
Let's read a little of the book. This is a beginning. It's where Glenn Lennox asks his mother a burning question. This chapter sprinkles little breadcrumbs for you to follow, hints of things to come. And the following chapters explore Rita's romance and her marriage to Brad, the birth of their children, and it leads up to the central wedding theme, wedding scene that Jean has already mentioned. So, A Glass Darkly, a novel by Jean Goulden. Chapter 1, Glenn, 2014. Come on, Mom, I'm right, aren't I? I urge. She takes a rattling breath, reaches a trembling, scaly hand for her cigarette, inhales slowly and smiles, an enigmatic, annoying Mona Lisa smile. And did she give a shallow nod? I'm not sure. Mom's propped up on Brandy's recliner. She was always slight. Now she's not much more than a skeleton, clad in leathery skin and cocooned in an old crocheted blanket she made by unraveling wool from the worn sweaters Aunt Mun knitted for us the year Dad died and our lives turned upside down. I stay with her a while, perched on the folding chair Brandy got out for visitors. The room's claustrophobic. The recliner and the sickening commode are crammed into an already modest room that was Brandy's den before Mom got so sick. Mom can't stand the cold, so the heat's cranked and the windows shut and trails of cigarette smoke spiral languidly to the popcorn ceiling. I don't say much. Mom's watching the television that's been moved onto Brandy's desk. An inane game show. Even so, the expressions that flit rapidly across her pinched face tell me she's following it. I watch her reflections on the screen. Her eyes dart about, her lips quiver, she frowns, she pulls a face, perhaps of disgust. She's frail, yet she's still herself. She's got all her marbles. But why can't she find a way to answer my question, damn it? A contestant shrieks hysterically after pulling the ridiculous correct answer out of thin air, remembering in the waning second she needed to hit the flatulent buzzer 3 times for a correct answer. Frustrated, I decide it's time to leave. I bend to kiss Mom, my lips barely brushing her parched skin. Agonizingly slowly, she tips her cigarette into the ashtray at her side. Her faded green eyes search mine as she reaches out her bird claw hand and very deliberately gives mine an almost imperceptible squeeze. She does it again. And a 3rd time. And I know. Well, what is it that Glenn needs to know? And what does he think he now knows? Well, you'll have to read the book to find out. I have a couple of questions, obvious questions. A Glass Darkly, that phrase sounds familiar. And why did you choose it for the title of your novel?
As I've already said, the central theme of the book is about identity. A glass darkly is a biblical phrase, and in biblical times, mirrors were polished bronze. So the image that you saw in them was very shadowy. Even nowadays, when we look in a mirror, we see our reflection, but we don't really see who we are. So I thought that was a good title for the book.
Okay. So you grew up in the UK, you live here and in Colorado. Why is the book set in New England?
Well, I spent 28 years in New England. I learned to shovel snow, and although it's been cold here, I'm very grateful I don't have to do that anymore. But at the time when I wrote the book, I knew more about New England than I do about here. So that's why it's set there.
Is the town that you lived in the town that you're writing about in the book?
No. I lived in a very privileged town, and for the book, I wanted an area where there was greater diversity, where somebody who's a hairdresser, somebody who works in a post office could afford to live there. So it's a fictitious town. In my mind, it's loosely modeled on a town that I know, but it's not anywhere near exactly the same.
Okay, the book moves along really quickly, and there are lots of narrators. And I found it amazing that you were able to make each voice distinct. Why did you choose to structure your book like that?
Well, I didn't know any better, actually. It just kind of grew. And I was worried that I couldn't create character because I was a non-fiction writer before this. So my characters speak in the present tense. I wanted them to be more vivid and to jump off the page. But that meant I had to share their thoughts and their words in their own words. And that was a new challenge for me. But I just tried to imagine how they would feel and react in each circumstance. On reflection, I now kind of wish that I had put a cast of characters at the beginning of the book, because there are a lot of narrators.
Talking of characters, sometimes they say that authors write a little bit of themselves into all of their characters. Are any of the characters you?
There are bits of me in most of the characters. For those of you who've read it, I hope there's not much of me in Brad. But there are two characters who are drawn from real life. Melody is Heather, who is the lady I knew who had Williams syndrome. And Melody, as those of you who will have read it, has this bubbly, outgoing, engaging, almost too engaging personality, and she has a great affinity for music. And then the other character, who is based on real life, is Sister Claudia, who appears in the prison scene. And years ago, I used to volunteer in a prison, and there was a diminutive nun who had this terrific spirit.
Okay, so the main male character is Brad. Tell us about Brad. And what kind of underwear did he wear?
I have to say I've forgotten. We debated it so long, I don't know what we landed on. Brad, I needed to be a character who would be attractive enough to Rita and fun that she would want to marry him, but also somebody who had to kind of decline during the book. And I felt like he needed to be a complex character, and there might be some hints as to why he declines. So we can see that he takes on or is given too much responsibility early on and doesn't know how to cope with it. Also, his father's attitude to women is very dated. Even I don't know if the father was a womanizer or not, but I wanted to put those hints in there. And also, with his relationship with Sandeep, he reveals that he really does love his family, even though he betrays them.
Do you have a favorite character?
Yes, Rita is definitely my favorite character. She's in many ways ordinary, but she has so much courage, she's tough, she has this great ability to forgive. So I really like Rita, and particularly in the early scenes, her flashing red hair. I like most of the characters, and I have a soft spot for the Polish guy, for his optimism and his dimple.
So only two characters are really drawn from real life, the nun and the Melody. What about the incidents in the book? Are any of them drawn from your life?
Oh, a lot of the incidents are drawn from my family's life. I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but Chris said I should share that there's an incident with an inner tube on the river. That's my son and his friends all the way. As I also said, I volunteered in a prison. This was a men's prison. It was low security, but from that, I got all of the details for the prison chapter, which I believe were pretty accurate for the time frame.
Why did you choose a family drama?
I wanted it to be accessible to everybody. I felt like we often hear about famous people, maybe somebody who's gone to the space station, and I just wanted to be something that pretty much everybody could relate to. These are ordinary people, and ordinary people often behave in extraordinary ways.
What would you like people to take away from this book?
Well, mostly it's for entertainment. I'm just privileged that anybody read it at all. But also, I would like people to think about who they are. Are they the person that they would like to be, and can they do anything to change that? Can they embrace courage and compassion? And can they do all of that looking adversity in the face with a little laughter?
Okay, speaking about laughter, I'd like to close this section with a reading from chapter 7. It's narrated by Rita's aunt, who is sometimes referred to as Aunt Monday or Mun. She provides childcare on Monday. And Rita has two small children, Brandy and Carlin. And Aunt Monday has agreed to make muffins with them. So I'm strong and wiry for my age, like an ox. She really is too heavy for me now, and I can only hold her for a few minutes. It's enough to calm her down a bit until we hear the sirens wailing in the distance. Renewed sobbing, crying, shrieking, and shivering. The neighborhood's athrob with blue lights flashing and fire trucks thundering down the street. The men jump off the truck and run up the path. Oh no! A couple of them unrolling the hoses. It's all right, I cry, but Brandy shouts, "Fire, fire!" again. Okay, I have one more question before I allow you to do the talking. In reviews of your novel, A Glass Darkly, things have been said like it's intriguing and compelling, that it's a warm-hearted family drama and a beautifully detailed story. What do your nearest and dearest think of your book?
Well, Chris did not read it until after it was published. I felt like if he didn't like it, I would just give up. But he read it almost in one go on various plane rides, and he said, "You wrote a very nice book." But my mother in the UK does not like the book one little bit. She has waited, I was going to say 94 years, she's going to be 94 soon, and of course she's only waited my lifetime to read a book. She thinks it's too American. You know? And I think that she was shocked by some of the scenes in it, but she didn't quite say that.
Okay, now it's your turn. Does anyone have some questions for Jean about the book, or her hiking, or her yoga? Yes.
Are you going to write another one?
Well, as you've noticed, I'm not a prolific author. I've written 3 books in 15 years. I have an idea for another book. However, promoting the current book is taking up quite a bit of time, so don't hold your breath. But one day, yes.
Oh, good.
Anyone else? I saw a hand over here. Yes?
I'm curious what you just said about your mom. What made it more American than British, other than location?
Pretty much everything, actually. Yeah. The turn of phrase, the location, the assumptions that we have here, the whole culture is different.
I just have one more. What I found interesting was those old social mores. It's almost like they were meant to be broken, and they were broken over and over again by getting pregnant or whatever. So I wonder if you would speak about that.
Yeah, I try to get it set within the times, and people often think differently now. But Rita has some reluctance until she's married to sleep with Brad. I think that's probably very dated nowadays. The shock of one of the daughters getting pregnant. Also, I don't think we would react like that. And then, I don't want to give too much away, but Glenn has a secret. And I'm guessing that people would be a little startled and taken aback, but not quite so shocked and angry as Lisa is in the book.
Yes.
You talked about earlier about learning a lot about ourselves from writing, or that we could learn. You learned about yourself, and I wonder if you kind of changed your way of thinking about writing now. That it's like your own psychological activity.
Yeah, that's maybe true, though I don't think I had thought it in quite that way. I often think when I write my blog posts, which is once a month, that I'm really working out things for myself and hoping that my readers relate to that as well.
Yeah.
So yes, there's some element of that.
So you invite us to do that.
To reflect on yourselves? Sure.
Go on. Yes.
I noticed that you were talking about mores and things. To me, the New England culture came through very strongly. I said the New England culture came through very strongly to me. I have spent most of my adult life living near New Orleans. Most of those things would not have had much reaction at all. even 30 or 40 years ago. So I thought that was well written, that it actually came through so strongly.
Thank you. I was a little worried that I didn't have enough sense of place, but I guess I did.
May I ask what the town was
Yes.
that you, because 3 of us are from New England. We're now nosy to know what the town is.
No, I'm going to keep that to myself.
4 of us, excuse me, there's number 4. And 5 of us.
Marshall?
Hi.
We
Within
should be
the,
able to figure that out.
within the chapters, you have breaks in some of the chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And what led you to do that instead of writing a transition?
Totally my editor's suggestion.
Okay.
Jean, what advice would you give an aspiring writer? The very first thing you would suggest.
Don't do it my way. No, I would suggest that you have much more of the structure of your book worked out. Not to the fine detail that I think Ken Follett knows the detail of every chapter of his books before he puts pen to paper. Not to that extent, but to have thought it through much more than I did. It will save on revisions in the end.
And speaking of that, I have a question about when you did the NaNoWriMo challenge, the November challenge, 50,000 words before you had it edited. Did you have all the characters that you ended up with in that? And did you come out of that? You said you knew it wasn't long enough and you worked on it till it became a novel, but did you have an outline or a vision better, for how you were going to proceed when you came out? Was it a good exercise in that way for you? What did it?
Yes, it was a good exercise. I knew, because I had written the wedding scene, that there would be a family with 3 red-headed daughters and a younger son. And from that, as they grow up, they're going to have partners and the cast of characters is going to develop. So I knew quite a bit to start with, but it was a very good exercise in, okay, let's get serious now. You're going to write a book, you have to figure things out instead of dilly-dallying around.
Did you write an outline after it, or did you not really outline?
I did bits and pieces. What I really did was timelines. I kind of obsessed as to if this child was born at such and such a date, would they be in school at this time? Would they be in kindergarten? Would they be in high school? Is it realistic that Glenn would be on the high school swim team? And I over and over again, I did timelines as to what would be realistic.
Kathy, did you have another question?
Yes, you mentioned in the beginning that your first editor took out all of the English idioms and everything. But I did notice, that you left some in.
Okay.
And I did, and I kind of, that was a little bit confusing to me because I didn't realize we were in Massachusetts till about the second chapter because of those idioms. I assumed that we were in England, and she obviously thought you should take them all out, but you didn't take them all out. Was that on purpose, or does it just,
I guess she didn't spot them.
She didn't spot them, okay. Yeah, I was curious about that, yeah.
Okay, Marcia?
Were you in a writer's group of any kind where you could workshop chapters or portions of the book and get feedback?
I should have been. And there are a few people here from a critique group from the Amelia Island Writers Association. And oh boy, I should have been in that.
Anything else? No? Okay. Thank you all so much for coming here to celebrate this debut novel publication. And Lynette is trying to tell me something.
I just wanted to let everyone know that so many ways you can support Jean in her writing process. She's on Instagram, Facebook, her blog, and her website. And writing reviews, if you love the book, is always a great idea.
Thank you very much.
And you can review the book, even if you bought it from here, you can still review it on Amazon or rate it on Amazon.
Yes. And now Jean will be very happy to sign some books for you. And thank you very much for being here.